Okay, great. So welcome to the Rutgers-Newark Small Business Development Center after lunch webinar. Well, it's way past lunchtime now. This is our second event for 2020. This is our What You Need to Know About Purchasing a Franchise webinar, being brought to you by the SBDC and FranNet. So just before we get started, just a little information about the SBDC. We are a resource center for the United States Small Business Administration, and our objective is to provide individuals with one-on-one business counseling, consulting, and technical assistance to start or grow your business. So if you need help with, or you need expertise in areas such as marketing, access to capital, import, exporting, contracting, procurement, marketing, franchising, we have consultants and counselors with expertise in just about any area you could think about in starting or growing your business, available and here to coach you or help you through any issues you might be facing. And this is provided to you free of cost. Your tax dollars is at work here. There are 12 SBDC centers across New Jersey. Our jurisdiction is Essex County, so if you are from Essex County, you get your counseling, or you will schedule your time here with one of our consultants. But if you're outside of Essex County, we do have SBDCs there. We have in Middlesex, Bergen County, Hudson, and I guess the further south or north you go, there are other SBDCs, some service in multiple counties, but you do have representation across New Jersey. In terms of the webinars and workshops and networking events that each SBDC center has, you are free to attend all. It doesn't matter which county you reside in. We welcome you to attend all our events. So to take advantage of those services, feel free to visit our website, which is www.rnsbdc.com or www.njsbdc.com. That is our HQ website. That will put you in contact with all the SBDCs, but ours, rnsbdc.com, is specific to Essex County. Even if you use that, we'll transfer you to your your respective county if that's the case. So today's webinar, like I said, is what you need to know about purchasing a franchise. It's being presented by Mr. Weeks. If at any time during today's presentation you have a question, feel free to use the chat, or you can also, because it's a small group today, you can unmute yourself. I'm not gonna stop anyone from using the microphone. It's not too much people where it's out of control. So you could either type your question or you can voice your question, and Mr. Weeks will do his best to answer it. At the end of the presentation, like he said earlier, we will be mailing out a copy of today's slides, and in the next 72 hours, we will email you out a replay of today's session for your viewing. So without further ado, I turn today's presentation over to Mr. Weeks.
Thanks, Priscilla. Joe, welcome. I think we have Claudia possibly on. I want to echo what Priscilla said about the Q&A portion. We have a small, intimate group. We can certainly, as we proceed and as you have questions, we can address them on the spot. So feel free to just, interrupt, raise your hand, I guess is one way to do it. And I'll check the chat box, and we will try to address your questions to the best of my ability. So let me just welcome you guys to the Purchasing a Franchise workshop. See if I can somehow figure out how to move to the next screen. There we go. So I'll give you a little bit about my background. Coming up on actually nearly about 20 years in the franchise industry. Prior to that, I spent 13 years with a large commercial insurer called the Chubb Insurance Company. When I resigned from there, after spending 13 years, I was assistant vice president of underwriting, had a nice run. I'll talk to you a little bit more about that and how I, navigated from my corporate life to my entrepreneurial life, and sort of, some of the reasons behind that. I think the story is pretty telling in and of itself. And when we talk about it, I think some of it may resonate with you folks as well. What I do for fun is I also run a nonprofit out of the city of Trenton, New Jersey, where I mentor a group of about 65 young men, in a pretty urban area, and try to talk to them about different things like entrepreneurship and college and different career paths and so forth. And as it states here, I'm a graduate of Fairleigh Dickinson University. We like to call that the Harvard on a Hackensack. So that was probably as close as I was going to get to my Harvard endeavors. So a little bit about me. I'm going to spend the next 60 minutes addressing a few areas of the Purchasing a Franchise sort of webinar. And we're going to spend a little time on the why business ownership, right? Listen, it's a lot of work. Could be stressful, could be costly, right? So why might that be on your radar for 2020? So we'll spend a little time there. We'll talk about the different options for getting into business. We heard from Joe earlier, and he spent time in corporate America and also spent about 7 years as a business owner. So, when we think of the three platforms, it's, as Joe did, you start a business from scratch. It's, your dream, your passions, your ideas, and or you can certainly buy an existing business, be it a franchise or otherwise, or you can buy a franchise, and we'll kind of compare and contrast sort of the pros and cons of the three platforms for business ownership. We'll talk about some of the risks and rewards, right? Earlier, I referenced the fact that it's a lot of work. We're going to demystify franchising a little bit. I think part of, the media and social media, we tend to hear franchising and we think McDonald's and Burger King, must have access to $2, $3, or $4 million to buy a franchise. And the fact of the matter is, there are many, many other options and alternatives outside of the food space, which do not require that sort of investment. And we'll talk about how we help you to identify the best business options for you and how to build your personal business model. So we'll talk more about that later. Who is FranNet? I would imagine, and as often as I do this presentation, I ask people, well, who is FranNet? And 100% of the time people go, I've never heard of FranNet. So I won't ask the question to you today, but I think I know the answer. So we are a 30-year-old international franchise consulting firm, have about 100 locally based offices, and I'll talk about the importance of being local a little later. And we work with you. We use certain online proprietary tools, as I stated earlier, to help you figure out, based on your skill sets, your lifestyle goals, your return on investment goals, how we were able to help you to figure out what's the best model from a franchise perspective that suits your objectives. The work that we do with you is sort of nice, right? Because it doesn't cost you any money. But what it does cost you, and I try to be very transparent about this, is it's going to cost you some time. It's going to cost you some energy, a little sweat equity. I'm going to hold you accountable to the process, right? Because the goal in making that right fit it's going to take some work on your end and on my end. It's going to be well worth it in the end, but for the serious person, it could be well worth it. I'm just going to go back for a minute. At the bottom, you see some partnerships, right? These are national partnerships that we have here at FranNet, one of which is our lovely partner, which is a national partnership with the Small Business Development Center. And I would urge you folks on here now, if you haven't utilized their services to any large degree, it's free, it's at no cost to you, and they have a phenomenal team of consultants to help walk you through that process so that you mitigate the activity of acquiring a business. We have a similar relationship with SCORE, Small Business Administration, as well as the Association of Women's Business Centers. And it's a franchise consulting company. So you might ask, well, why would I want to work with a franchise consultant? The nice part about it is most people don't know what they don't know, right? And so if they're thinking about franchising and they go to Google and they Google franchising, and hundreds of, if not thousands of franchise companies pop up. And the reality is that there's over 3,600 franchisors in the United States alone. So how do you boil that down and figure out what's the best franchise opportunity for you? Well, we have a proprietary system where we can help you to figure that out. And we offer you choices, right? So out of those 3,600 franchises, it could be 3, 4, 5 that make a really good fit for you on the surface. How do we figure out what's the perfect fit for you? We have about 180 plus franchise companies, 182, 183 as of today, which are companies that we work with and that are in our inventory. We vetted these companies. We understand what their success metrics are. We understand their validation, and you'll hear me talk more about that later. But validation, when you hear me use that term, it's when you are in the due diligence process with a franchisor and you have an opportunity to speak to the franchisees. So we will not bring a company into our inventory if the franchisees in that system aren't happy, aren't satisfied, aren't making money. So you can, feel a sense of comfort in that we've pre-vetted these companies. It's going to be access to unlisted resales. In the franchise space, more often than not, when a franchisee is looking to sell that unit or that territory, in many cases, it never becomes public, right? It stays within the confines of the franchisor. Usually, opportunities are offered to franchisees in proximate territories. And then oftentimes, they'll work with a consulting company like ours to find the right candidate for those resales. And last but not least, certainly the risk mitigation piece. We are going to make sure that you dot the I's, that you cross the T's, that no question goes unanswered, right? We do this every day because at the end of the day, your success is our success. And we also have access to lenders and funding opportunities that you may not have found on your own. And at the end of the day, folks, we do not sell franchises. We are merely taking your information, lifestyle goals, business goals, return on investment goals, your transferable skills, and aligning it with the franchise companies in our inventory that would seem to be a good fit for you. I'm going to pause here for 1 second and just ask if there's any questions. All right.
Not yet.
All righty. This is the Client Bill of Rights. I'm not going to read it. It's here. I left it in because at your leisure, I suggest you read it. We're the only franchise consultant company out there that has something like this. It's important for you to understand that like franchisors, and not every franchisor, because it's a franchise, is a good franchise company. So therefore, consequently, there's some good companies in the space that we occupy, and and there's some not so good ones. So this sort of speaks to who we are and our commitment to our clients and their ultimate success. So when you get a minute, I do encourage you to read through it. As I think about my stint in corporate America, and even if I think back to my parents and my grandparents, they kind of went into the workplace and spent 25, 30 years, 40 years in some cases. And, they started here and they, ended up in retirement in the same company, right? And it was a 25, 30, 35-year run. And they got a pat on the back, a gold watch, and off into retirement they went. Unfortunately, today, things aren't that simple, right? It probably looks a little bit more like this. So that path to retirement is not that linear, pathway that, maybe our parents and grandparents were accustomed to, right? So there's, we're getting downsized and right-sized, or we leave a company and start at another company, and maybe we're starting back at a lower level. So the ability to start and end up in retirement with the same company is not as likely today as it was. And so if we think about part of why that might be is, and this is data from the Department of Labor, about 71% of the workforce today is on some level not engaged, right? And if you look to the left of the screen, well, some of the reasons are, flexibility, right? I want to control, my schedule, my time, my hours of work. But oftentimes, that becomes a conflict between your employer and you, right? Sometimes we want to have more control, more authority to make decisions about our future. It could be, contribution, right? I've achieved certain levels of success in my career, and now, I want to give back, but I don't really have the time. So, there are a multitude or a myriad of reasons why people are disengaged. And some of you on the call may have felt, some of these different challenges throughout different aspects of your career. And so at the end of the day, we want to retire. We want to have a level of success, but we have these other items out here which impede our ability to reach success. When I opened up, I said, well, I'll tell you a little bit about my story and how I moved from corporate America to entrepreneurship. And for me, it was really, I lacked control. I had a 3-year-old son, I had a 1-year-old daughter. My wife was a stay-at-home mom with a beautiful home out on the east end of Long Island. And so when I talked to my family and to my friends, on the surface, it appeared that I was the epitome of success, right? One of 6 children growing up in Camden, New Jersey. I had a 6-figure income, stock options, all of these things, company cars and all of this other stuff, right? But what didn't I have, right? I didn't have control over my life. I didn't have flexibility. When Chubb said, as I started to move up the ladder, when Chubb said, well, boy, we need you to go to Chicago and spend, 4 or 5 days doing an audit, for some people, they say, hey, wow, Chicago's a great city. It's a great place to go visit. For me, it created pain. It created angst because it was more time away from my kids. So I knew after about 10 years in corporate America that the only way that I was going to feel real success, which for me, I defined as control, flexibility, and independence, so that I could spend more time with my kids and at the same time make money. So franchising and entrepreneurship became the vehicle for me for success and ultimately retirement. So what I try to emphasize to people is this is a big step, right? A lot of concern, a lot of angst about change, and people usually aren't comfortable with change. figure out what your why is. Why are you doing it? If it's not something listed here, maybe it's something else, right? But your why, at the end of the day, folks, must be compelling and sustainable. And the reason I say that is most people you tell them that you're buying a business will talk you out of it, right? We live in the land of the free, freedom and all this stuff, right? But most people at the end of the day want to own a business, but are fearful of change, fear of failure, right? So when you develop a compelling why, that fear of failure will be mitigated over time, right? So I often talk about developing your why, understanding what is your pain. When we think about business ownership in America, it's on the rise, right? Nearly 30 million, and this is data from the SBA, as you can see, nearly 30 million businesses in the United States are small businesses, and certainly are under 4 employees 65% of the time, and 20% of the time are family-owned businesses, right? If we think about New Jersey alone, New Jersey has 260,000 small businesses, 90% of which are under $10 million in revenue. So business ownership can be that alternative path for you to success and ultimately retirement. When I'm meeting with my clients and we talk about business ownership and we talk about, well, what are your fears? What are your concerns? These are some typical responses that I get. Well, boy, the job is safer than a business. Depends, right? We're going to talk a little bit about that later. Wait until the economy is better. I hear that often, although the economy probably is doing pretty well today. Probably the biggest ones are really around time, money, mistakes. How much time will it take me to break even? How much time will it take me to see a profit? How much time will it take me to do the due diligence, right? And how much money is it going to take for me to build this business successfully? Oftentimes, I don't know where to start or find what I'm looking for. As I mentioned to you earlier, there's 3,600 franchises in the United States. How do you start to peel back that onion? We talked earlier about is working for someone else safer? And the fact of the matter is, in the long term, and many of my clients, and I speak at outplacement centers where many of my clients have spent 20, 25, 30 years in the financial services space, IT, and many of them have been aged out of their jobs and they're now looking for that encore career, right? So the days of working for someone else and in the long term it's safer has probably in many fields and in many cases gone by the wayside. Sort of an inverse relationship with business ownership. Owning your business, as I talked about, can be scary, create a lot of angst, right? But the nice part is when it's yours, you cannot be downsized or right-sized out of it. You can grow it at your pace. And theoretically, the longer you own your business, the safer it should become. One of the concerns that I talked about earlier is people say, well, how will the economy impact my business, right? And one of the things we try to talk about at FrankNet is, what's happening in the economy can impact your business, but you have to, look at your business based on certain market characteristics. Because, one of the things that I can tell you is that as certain as the day is long, right, there'll be another downturn in the economy. There's probably a downturn in the economy every 7 to 12 years. Last one was, 2008. We're now in 2020, so it's a 12-year window there. Prior to that, it was 2001. But if you go back historically through time, you'll find that there's typically a downturn in the economy every 7 to 12 years. We're starting to see some indicators now, folks, of a possible downturn. I don't see any indicators that it would indicate it'll be anything similar to what happened in 2008, but I was watching CNBC a few weeks ago, and they were talking about the inverted yield curve, right? And that's when the yield on the 10-year Treasury bond actually dips below the yield on the 2-year Treasury bond, right? And how that has historically been an indicator of a potential downturn in the economy. So there are signs out there that something's coming. We don't know the impact. But what I would suggest to you is that this has happened over time. So the best thing you can do is look at your business model relative to certain market characteristics. Any questions there? All right. So what do I mean by looking at certain business characteristics, right? So there are some businesses that are driven based on demographics, right? Think about senior care, senior care, healthcare services, right? There's about 7,000 to 10,000 baby boomers retiring every day, right? It's projected that the number of people turning 65 will double in the next 10 years. So if the fundamentals of your business model is predicated upon senior care, healthcare, that might be a good sign, because the potential downturn in the economy probably and theoretically won't have much impact. When we think about those same baby boomers, I think about myself sort of on the cusp of the baby boomer deal, but we've been in our home for 19 years, right? When we first bought the home, I did everything that I thought I could do, right? And now as I've gotten older and the kids are in college, I tend to outsource, the repairs in the home and to small to medium-sized businesses rather than me try to, figure it out, right? Think about pet care, right? Pet care is the 7th largest industry in the United States today. It's about 80 million households that have at least one pet. And I can tell you I'm one of them. We have a 6.5-pound Yorkie. And, 2 or 3 weeks, he's off socializing with other pets at Canine Resort, right? And we drop them off in the morning and we pick them up in the evening when we get home. Sort of like how we dropped off our kids. Your dog, your pets become part of your household. What about essential services, right? There's about 300 million cars on the road in the United States today. Car breaks down. The average age of the car, by the way, and this might be surprising, the average age of the car on the road today is about 11 and a half years. So people are holding on to their cars, and eventually it's a machine, right? It's going to break down. So it's an essential service. What about the hair care industry? It's kind of where I kind of got my sea legs in the franchise space. I bought a hair care franchise called Fantastic Sam's. Had about 1,400 locations around the country. I bought a master, right? We'll talk a little bit about that later. But it's a $70 billion industry. We live in a society where people want to look good, right? It's never going to be impacted on any significant level by technology, right? It can't be outsourced to China. There's high demand. So for me, it checked a lot of boxes. And one of the things I'll tell you folks, if you're thinking about franchising or just business ownership, develop what your must-haves are, right? So my must-haves were, I wanted something with high demand, less impact by emerging technologies, couldn't be outsourced, right? So you start to develop these boxes, and then wherever it lands you, then is, can I see myself doing that business? I never thought that I'd see myself in the hair care space, and I spent 13 years simply on the hair care side. Fitness is becoming an essential service, particularly for the millennials as well as the baby boomers, right? So while on the surface it seems very competitive, and it is, and we're going to talk about competition and how it intertwines with regard to the franchise space. What are the different value propositions that the different fitness franchises bring to the table? Another essential service is a business that's related to damage restoration. Not the sexiest of businesses, right? But regardless of what's going on in the economy, if there's a natural disaster, water, fire, mold, whatever it is in the home or in the business, insurance companies spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year to acquire, policyholders. We see that, we're bombarded with the Progressive and the Liberty Mutual commercials every day, right? So the nice part about this is businesses, whether the economy is good or bad, whether there's a downturn, damage restoration, again, while not the sexiest of businesses, is going to do well in good times and bad times. And keep in mind, folks, as we're thinking about and talking about franchising, when I mention damage restoration, you ought to be thinking, because this is the way the franchisors are thinking, they don't want you, the business owner, out doing the damage restoration. They want you hiring, firing, and managing the staff accordingly and doing the marketing and networking to the insurance companies and to the banks and to the real estate folks in your community to generate those contracts. Any questions there before I move on? All right. The last segment is businesses that help other small businesses succeed, right? So as I mentioned earlier, it's 260,000 small businesses in New Jersey. 90% are under $10 million. So when we think, business coaching, digital marketing, staffing companies in New Jersey and beyond, they're all providing support. They're white collar business to business models, much like what we were involved in our corporate life. If you come from a sales background, there are tremendous sales training franchises out there that would allow you to capitalize on your previous, transferable skills in the sales space, right? Interestingly enough, corporations in the United States alone spend about $7.5 billion annually on training their employees on increasing their sales metrics, right? It's the third most trained group after managers and executives. So, don't forget about the business to business franchise opportunities, which is helping small businesses that don't have the bandwidth to figure out, okay, what are our IT needs? What are our staffing needs, right? They're going to outsource that and focus on that which they do well. So they talked about earlier, so there's 3 platforms, right? Start a business from scratch, buy a franchise, or buy an existing business. We're going to briefly look at all 3 platforms and we'll kind of address some of the pros and cons. So you start a business from scratch, and I'm sure Joe could attest to this. Many advantages, right? Total control, it's yours. You make all the decisions. No one else is telling you how to do it. Could be large upside if done right, and you're building it from your passion and so forth. Now, some of the corresponding disadvantages, obviously, are, I got to create the systems, right? I've got to figure out how I'm going to finance this startup venture. As you know, and as I know, and as I see every day, the lenders aren't exactly knocking down your door to provide money for business where you have to create the systems and there's very little data to support your vision. So there's typically going to be a slower ramp up. And the fact of the matter is, and this isn't a reason not to do it, certainly, but the fact is that there's going to be a higher failure rate for many of the reasons we talked about. As we move into existing businesses, obviously there's going to be cash flow. Hopefully there's going to be cash flow there when you begin looking at the acquisition of that business. There's going to be actual financial results, which nice from a nice side of things allows you to appeal greater to the lending community for more money to fund it as you go forward. Going to be a market established, obviously, as customers, employees, And most importantly, probably more than any of the others, is there's already a system in place. You're not figuring it out. And lastly, and we do resales as well here at FranNet, be it independents or franchises. You know, there could be a way, depending on how motivated the seller is, to secure the financing by having the owner hold some of the paper. So as an example, maybe, you know, the business is selling for $100,000, and you're in a position and the seller's motivated, and you make an offer of $80,000 and you ask him to hold the $20,000 for, he or she to hold the $20,000 for, you know, 6 months or a year. One of the benefits that we see with regard to that strategy is, you know, if you buy a business outright and you call the owner and he's on the beach having a Mai Tai in Puerto Rico, and he looks down and he sees it's you, the odds of him possibly answering the phone go down considerably versus if he was still holding some of the note to that business. So to the extent that you can secure owner financing, typically could be a good strategy to overcome that. Some of the disadvantages of buying an existing business is the valuation. It's probably the toughest piece about it. How do you place a valuation and confirm the valuation of that business that you're going to buy? Part of the problem that we see when we're looking at resales and looking at valuations is, you know, for whatever reason, and everybody has their own motives, right? But oftentimes there's cash off the books, right? And so when there's cash off the books, how do you account for that in the valuation, right? It could be a hidden seller motive. You think you're getting a great price. You know, I'm looking at buying your Ace hardware, and maybe it really is a really good price, but at the end of the day, how do I really uncover what your motivations are? And maybe your motivations are that you have knowledge and information that Home Depot and Lowe's is coming to town 3 to 5 years from now. How do I know what that is? Another big one that we see is employee defection, right? When the owner goes, so goes the employees or the manager or the key employees, right? How do you manage that process? And then there's buying a franchise. Again, advantages and disadvantages to both. But one of the biggest things is there's typically going to be some name recognition. It ought to be a very, very proven business system. You know, when we think back to Ray Kroc, 1955, acquiring, you know, McDonald's, the first thing he did was put in and address the systems in an operations manual, right? Which says, okay, all of our burgers are going to be 6 ounces and a ½ ounce of onions and a teaspoon of mustard and a tablespoon of ketchup, right? That seems simplistic, but that was part of what was going on. So when you're looking at a franchise or you're looking at buying an existing business, what are the systems, right, that you're acquiring, that you're buying? You know, what sort of training and support? The good franchise companies have large departments of training and support. You know, McDonald's in 1961 launched Hamburger University, right? They were the first ones to do it. And now as you're looking at these franchising, merging and otherwise, you know, they have similar universities, which are 1 to 2 weeks before you open, and then ongoing as you're in business. Typically going to be a lower failure rate, again, for the reasons we talked about: training, support, proven business systems. Certainly going to be more financing options. The banks, the lending community likes franchising because of the systems, right? But there's some disadvantages, folks, right? There's going to be a structured operating system, and you're going to be required to align with those operating systems, right? When they're, you know, going through, I looked at Taco Bell, so I was driving into the office today, and they're revamping, you know, the image and the look of Taco Bell, right? So when Taco Bell decides to go through sort of a change like that, well, the franchisees have to sign on, right? Probably the biggest thing that I hear when I'm doing workshops on franchising is people say, well, why would I buy a franchise? I don't want to pay royalties, right? And if that's a bugaboo for you, it's stuck in your craw, It just is what it is. But there's going to be ongoing royalty payments for the life of that franchise agreement. Most franchise agreements are for 10 years. Typical royalty payments range anywhere from 2% to 10% of your weekly gross revenue. And that's just part of the process. You're getting the training and support and the proven business system, the name recognition, but there is a small to moderate price to pay for that by way of royalties. Any questions before I proceed? Okay. So with the franchises, creation of a distribution channel to build brand identity and attain market dominance quickly. Most of the, excuse me one second, put that on hold. Or mute. So most.
Can I just ask a quick question? I'm sorry.
Yep. Okay. Yep. Go ahead, Joe. Joe, did you say you had a question?
I'm sorry. I got to hold my space bar down. When you talked about the owner holding a note, so that's something you would negotiate in the terms of the note, I guess? Is that
Yes.
like a market rate kind of interest kind of note? Is that what you're talking about?
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Okay.
And you'd be surprised how often people are willing to do it, but if you don't ask for it, you know, my mother said, if you don't ask, you don't get, right? And so if you go into the negotiation and you feel strongly that that's, you know, a must-have for you, you ought to try to get it.
And
then,
I guess without sidetracking too much, I mean, having a business owner still around to answer questions, you would probably want that for at least a little while, right? I mean, I would imagine whether you have a note with them or not, you'd want to build something in there where you've got, you know, access to them and their knowledge for a certain amount of time. But I guess your point was they'd be more willing to pick up the phone if they still have some financial interest in it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, you know, even if it's not, I mean, you know, if the owner cares about the business he built and his employees and things like that, you know, at the end of the day, still going to try to answer your questions and you know, hopefully, you know, help with the transition from the old, you know, from his ownership to your ownership. But no, you're right on about that.
Okay. And then lastly, thinking about that, you probably do want them out of the business at some point. So, you know, you may want them around for a little while, but then you probably don't want to enter into a deal where they're still somewhat involved in the business for long term.
Yeah, absolutely. So I bought a unit before I opened my own, and it was a resale. And, you know, for me, because it was a franchise, I just wanted the owner to go away, right? You know, we had a relationship with the staff, and I felt like for me, the best way to get in was to take it over day one. And whatever questions I had in the transition, you know, for me, it was a phone call to, you know, the headquarters, to the home office, right? But in every situation, it can be different, particularly if you're buying an independent business, right?
Right. That's what I was thinking more of. But you're right. With a franchise, you kind of have the home office to help out.
Right. Yep. Now you're spot on with that. Any other questions on that?
No, that's it. Thanks.
Awesome. So with the franchise, we'll get into this real quick. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but it's, you know, basically you're taking someone else's idea, cloning it, and making it yours, right? And in return, you're going to pay an initial franchise fee. That's always part of the deal. And there's going to be ongoing royalties, as I stated earlier. And of course, you're getting the trademarks, trade dress, all that stuff, the products and business systems. So franchising has been regulated by the Federal Trade Commission since 1979, right? So whether you're buying I'll use McDonald's because we talked about McDonald's earlier, whether you're buying a McDonald's in New Jersey or McDonald's in Southern California, the franchisor is required to give you something that's called a franchise disclosure document. And it's made up of about 23 different items. Each one represents another aspect which should consume some part of your due diligence, right? So the first 4 items really address who owns the franchise, right? What's their background? Is it private equity companies? Is it, the original founder? How long have they been in the business, right? These are things that are sort of routine and fundamental, right? But you need to be comfortable with that, right? Because again, you're entering into this agreement for 10 years, right? Certainly you want to go to item 3 and look at if there's been any litigation, right? If you're looking at the franchise disclosure document and there's continuous and ongoing litigation between the franchisor and the franchisee, that might be reason to pause the due diligence and ask some different questions, right? And they're also be required to disclose if there's been any bankruptcies filed on behalf of the ownership. In item 7, it's going to list all of the fees and costs associated with this acquisition of this particular franchise, right? From the franchise fees on down to furniture, fixtures, equipment, lighting, signage, right? They've done this in many cases 50, 75, 1,000 times over. In McDonald's case, some 25,000 times over, right? They should have a pretty good idea of how much the insurance is going to cost, right? How much working capital should you have set aside in your account, right? So these are typically ranges, so they're not 100% accurate, but there is a range that you can work with. It's a range because the price of real estate in New Jersey, quite frankly, might be different than the cost of real estate in Charlotte, right? And then if there's any royalties associated with it, which 100% of the time there is, they have to outline for you what percentage of your gross revenue will go to marketing, ongoing royalties, initial franchise fees. So it's sort of full disclosure. They're going to tell you what your territory is. The nature of franchising is you cannot cannibalize someone else's territory, right? You bought Bergen County or you bought Essex County, right? You can't go and sell your products and services in Monmouth County, right? There's going to be something called a financial performance representation. You'll hear folks refer to this as an item 19 because it's item 19 of the 23 items in the franchise disclosure document. About 60 to 62% of all franchises in the United States actually provide for your due diligence a financial performance representation. Here's where I caution you. And first, let me tell you what it is. So it's an opportunity for the franchisor to say to Claudia and to Joe, you've now moved into the middle stages of the due diligence. So we're going to give you our FDD, and in item 19, you're going to see the average revenue for franchisees in our system that have been open for 3 years or longer, right? And it's usually something that's fairly attractive, right? And you go, oh, wow, that's how much money I can make. But I caution you because while it's legal to do that, you need to peel back the onion and understand truly what the financial performance representation is truly stating, right? And there's usually some footnotes in there. This represents the top 20% of the system or whatever it is. So they want to give you a gauge, right? Because they can't otherwise say to you, because it's against franchise, it's against the Federal Trade Commission's laws on franchising. Franchisors cannot tell you, John, we think you're going to make $250,000 in your first year. That is illegal. That's an illegal practice. So they use the financial performance representation to give you some idea of how much money you can make. And then what we try to do is have you develop that information by talking to franchisees in the system. So you might be wondering, how do I access the franchisees who are already in the system? Well, the Federal Trade Commission's already figured that out, right? So they require all the franchisors to list all of the current franchisees in the system, their name and their phone number, as well as the names and phone numbers of past franchisees. So one of the things we do at FranNet is we say, listen, here's a list of 18 questions, tried and true, and you need to talk to 8 to 10 minimally of current franchisees in that system. Certainly talk to as many as you like, right? But you're going to ask them questions like, hey, how long have you been doing this? If you had to do it over again, would you do it? What you're ultimately trying to get to is how satisfied are they with the franchisor, the support, and ultimately the return on their investment, right? So we've developed 18 questions that would help you get to that end goal so you understand that at the end of the day, realistically, is this the right fit for me? And you go to item 21, which is the financial statement. Ooh, let me go back. Franchisors are required to have audited financial statements, updated every year and showing the past 3 years. Again, this is important that you look at that, you understand it, because remember, you're sort of marrying yourself to this concept for the next 10 years. So you want to know that the franchisor is on strong financial footing to support you and incoming franchisees as long as you're in the system and beyond, right? Because certainly at some point, there's going to be an exit strategy where you're going to sell your business. And by the way, you can sell a franchise. You can sell a franchise at any point. I often hear, well, if I buy a franchise, well, I'm locked in for 10 years. You're absolutely not locked in for 10 years. If you decide that you've met your return on investment goals in year 4, tell the franchisor you're looking to sell. You decide what the valuation is for your business. That's your valuation, not the franchisor's valuation. And if you find a buyer that the franchisor approves, and yes, they do need to approve your buyer, right? Because they don't want you to sell to someone that's undercapitalized and is going to bring damage or reproach upon the brand. So they still need final sign-off. But you can decide at any point within that 10 years that if you want to sell it, you can. Typically, franchises that we see, the good ones, usually sell for anywhere from 2.5 to 4 times owner's discretionary income is a good rule of thumb to use. So if they're making $100,000, that business might go for $250,000 to $400,000. It's a reasonable rule of thumb from a valuation perspective as it pertains to franchises. But you can set that determination. If you can't find a buyer on your own, you can then approach the franchisor, and they may potentially have interest in buying your existing business, your existing franchise as well. So in the list of outlets, the franchisor is also required to, if they own 15 or 20 or 1,000 units of the 25,000 McDonald's, if they're corporate owned, they're required to list that for you as well in the list of outlets. Any questions on the legal side of it before we move on? Okay, how are we doing on time? Okay. So due diligence, right? You want to talk to current franchisees as well as past franchisees. Oftentimes, from a practical perspective, if the franchisees are no longer in the system, it's going to be hard for them to pick up the phone and talk to you about why they left the system, right? And maybe they left the system just because it was, they found a buyer and they just wanted to get out. It's not always a negative thing because they're out of the system. It's just oftentimes more difficult to get a hold of them. One of the big things we're seeing now in franchising, if you were to ask me that question, because the job market is pretty strong today, has been pretty strong for a couple of years, I might add, it's the semi-passive ownership models. Think of Massage Envy, you've probably heard of, right? The typical Massage Envy owner or franchisee, you'll very rarely find in the business when you go there for your massage, right? Massage Envy has about 1,000 franchises around the country, sold out here in New Jersey, of course, one of the places where they started. has about 1 million customers worldwide. You'll very rarely see their franchisees in the system. Some models, typically in the hair care, beauty, personal care services, fitness, 90% of those franchise models are designed for people who are either gainfully employed, so they're still in corporate America, but maybe they want to, diversify their holdings. Maybe it's a exit strategy from corporate America, but it's the model where you're hiring a manager. You'll often hear it referred to as executive franchise models, where you're hiring a manager and you're managing the manager. And the goal is typically to open 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units over the course of a period of time. And then when it meets your financial goal, then it could become potentially your exit strategy from corporate America. Think of Great Clips. I think the average franchisee has 5, 6, 7 units today. You'll hardly ever see a Great Clips franchisee in there if you were to pop in to speak to the owner. The models aren't designed that way. They're designed to build an empire. So if you were to ask me again, what's the big thing in franchising, it's the semi-passive ownership models. Again, you typically see it in hair, beauty, fitness, and wellness. Downside possibly is they tend to be a slightly higher investment threshold, and that's really driven around real estate. You know what the cost of real estate is in New Jersey, but the semi-passive business models are always real estate based, which drives up the investment. And you're going to deplete a little bit of your net income, right? Because again, you're managing the manager. So if it's normally customary to pay the manager in that segment $50,000 a year, well, that's $50,000. It's not going into your pocket. Talk about some common franchising myths. Franchising is only fast food and retail, and we sort of know that that's not quite the case, right? So when we think about fast food, so full service restaurants, and again, 3,600 franchises, food service 5%, QSRs 20%. So 25% of the 3,600 franchises out there are technically food, which leaves a ton of other opportunities out there. So, don't just think, well, it's franchising, it's food, I need $3 million. Oh, well, so franchising is off the table for me. Many other segments with significantly lower acquisition price points. Franchises succeed because of the quality of the product. Fact of the matter is, folks on this phone call, if you make a burger or if you eat meat, right, your hamburger probably tastes significantly better than McDonald's. I know mine certainly does, but my culinary skills are pretty superb, I might add. But the reality, here's what it is, guys. It's the business system, right? So as you're analyzing a franchise, set aside for a minute what the widget is, right? What the mousetrap is, and spend more time looking at, what are their marketing systems and plans? What are their sales plans, operations? What's the accounting system like, right? How do I collect the money? How do I pay my employees, right? What's the best practices for those things? The really good franchise systems are really sound around those 4 key components. Successful franchises emerge in new industries with no new competitors, right? How often do I hear from people, well, it's too competitive, there's too much competition, right? Fact of the matter is, successful franchises emerge from well-established industries by creating consolidation. Earlier, I referenced Great Clips and Supercuts, right? Two of the leading sort of value hair care brands out there, right? Both of which are sold out here in New Jersey. Started franchising in the mid-'80s when there was a barber shop on or around the corner from you, right? And so the fact of the matter is, competition is good. You need to look at what is the value proposition of that franchise relative to the independent competition that exists in your market. But The reality is franchises do not enter segments where there is no competition. If there's no competition, conversely, there's probably not a lot of demand. What's the systems? McDonald's started when there was a burger joint on every corner. Now they have 25,000 plus units worldwide. As I stated, we're seeing more recent examples of that in the consumer space as well. Franchises are expensive. Ooh, so that slide is out of order. I apologize. So when you get this, this will be fixed. If we look at, so here's a little pie chart, right? So if we look at franchises under $100,000, remember 3,600 is the landscape. 27%, or nearly a third of them, cost under 100,000. So again, we have to step back, remove ourselves from the commercialization of franchising, and recognize that there are a lot of really good home-based service franchises out there that are low cost and do very well. You gotta remember, we live in a service-based economy. How much money do you need?
Can I ask you real quick?
Yes, absolutely.
So when you say that the investment, is that everything that would be required?
Yes. So when, and I'm glad you clarified that. So when I say investment, we're talking about the total cost of the acquisition of that franchise. So that includes your initial franchise fee, furniture, fixtures, equipment, the whole deal, signage, lighting, all that. And
then any capital that they require you to have in the bank, or, you know, if there are any stipulations like that as well.
Yep, the working capital is how we kind of call it in the franchise space, the working capital. That's all included in these numbers.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, great question. So typically the way it works, and this is kind of bringing in sort of the funding side, most of my clients don't want to use 100% of their capital to finance their business venture, right? So the metric from a franchising perspective as it pertains to funding is, you know, as long as your credit score is over 680 and you have 25 to 30% of the total investment, as we were just talking about, available to you liquid, then the lenders we work with will finance the balance of the investment. So on a $100,000 example, you have to have 25,000, 680 credit score, you know, high level, it's the basics. And then the SBA lenders that we work with will typically finance the balance of the 70 or 75%. And that works all the way up to, you know, whatever the total investment is. So always think equity injection, skin in the game. The franchisors want to know that you have some skin in the game. The lenders, in order to access the balance of their capital, they want to know that you have a certain amount of skin in the game as well. So where can that money come from? Obviously, your personal savings. If you have a rich uncle or aunt, which I did not have, so I had to go it alone. You know, HELOCs are doing very well, particularly for our franchise consultants out in the West Coast, where the real estate markets are going through the roof, right? It's not uncommon for them to use HELOCs to fund it. Seller financing, we talked about from a resale perspective, and something that you probably haven't heard of before, which is called a ROBS program, or 401k rollover program. And ROBS stands for rollovers business startups. And so we don't do those here. Probably about 60% of my clients will use a ROBS mechanism to fund parts or all of their franchise acquisition. One of the key caveats there is that you must no longer be employed with that franchise, with that employer, in order to use those funds to fund your business. Okay, the nice part about it. Yep, go ahead.
I'm sorry, you're probably going to say it. That's without penalty?
Yeah, very good. So as you know, typically there's an early withdrawal and there's income tax on it, right? Those two things become the penalties that you're kind of referring to. So if you're moving it from one defined benefit plan to another, which is set up to fund your business, then the ERISA laws in the United States allow you to forego the early withdrawal of income tax on that money. And so the companies, we have a couple companies that we work with that do this, that we would connect you to, and they work you through all of the intricacies associated so that you do this in accordance with the prevailing ERISA laws.
Now, my guess is, though, if you've got the money outside of a 401k, that would be your first way to go, because you don't want to give up the money in a 401k growing tax-free if you can help it.
It's funny, Joe. Everybody has different risk tolerance when it comes to these things. I hear some people say to me, "Look, I've socked this money away for years. There's plenty there, plenty available to me. I don't want to go to a bank and pay, 6.5%, 7% interest on, $300,000 for 10 years, right? So, maybe they cut that borrowing amount in half and subsidize it with parts of their own money. So it varies from client to client, but we're seeing more and more people today, and maybe it has something to do with, potential changes in, what's going on potentially in the stock market. But we get different, everybody's risk tolerance for how to fund the business is different.
Yeah, I guess I just have a financial mind saying I'd rather pay a bank 6% or 7% and have a better chance of my money growing 10, 20, 30%. That's sitting in a 401k tax-free. But we're going off on a tangent, but that's good to know that you have that option.
Yeah. It's not for everybody. Some people are steadfast on it as you are, and that's okay. It's just, here's another option. It's available to you. Here are the people that can help you with it. And then if you're that person that says, hey, listen, I'll just fund it outright because I can, or I'll fund it, I'll put more money in and pay the 6.5%, 7% to the SBO for 10 years. They all work for individuals that have different, risk tolerance levels.
And one other question though. So does this only apply to the starting of the business, the purchasing of the business, or does it apply if I needed to fund more into the business later, you could then access the 401k if you needed to?
Yep, you can do that as well. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. Great questions. So I'm going to spend a lot of time here, kind of touch base on it earlier. High return requires a high investment. We sort of think that that's true. Fact of the matter is no correlation between the cost of a franchise and potential return, right? Take a company like service-based painting franchise, sold out again here in New Jersey. That's why I'm talking about the ones that are sold out. Company called CertaPro, right? You've probably seen what I think are the ugly yellow vans riding around, but usually successful franchise, right? Provides residential and commercial painting. I think I heard that the average household in the United States gets their rooms repainted every 3 or 4 years, right? But the franchise costs all in about 135, 140,000. You'll look in their FDD and you'll see that their average franchisees make about 150,000 a year, right? So there's no real, correlation between the cost of the franchise and the potential return. You don't have to, spend $1 million to make $1 million necessarily. And again, service businesses require far less capital investments and frequently yield, higher returns. CertaPro is just an example of that. They do very well, been around for, 30 plus years, owned by a company called First Service Brands, which owns about, 1,900 different franchises in multiple systems, right? Industry experience is required. Fact of the matter is, it's really not. They want people who are going to use their system. Meineke has been around for 45, 50 years, got about 1,000 plus units around the country. if I send Joe says, hey, you know, I'm a mechanic, I'm great at what I do. I really like to own a Meineke franchise. Meineke, and I send you in, Meineke would be on the phone to me in the New York City Minute, pointing, you know, we don't want auto mechanics running our businesses, right? We want business people who understand, you know, that our business is predicated on repeat service, right? And so we don't want the mechanic who in a pinch is going to do it his way or jumping under the car to start fixing something. They want you at the front desk, meeting, greeting, shaking hands, kissing babies, and creating a relationship with the consumer, right? So what they're looking for is transferable skills. Let me just go, yeah, franchisors train you on how to use their system. That's what I wanted to make. Royalties, talked a little bit about that, not going to spend a lot of time there. Franchisors make money over the long term. So think that, you know, listen, in the first couple of years, they're investing in marketing and real estate and operations. First couple of years at 5, 6, 7% of $100,000, they're not getting a strong return on their investment. Where they want to get you to is $1 million, you know, at 5 or 10% royalty by year 4 or 5. Now they're making money on you, right? So they typically lose money in the short term, but that's sort of to your benefit, right? Because most franchises or most businesses, let's just boil it down to businesses, fail in the first couple of years if they're going to fail, right? For all the reasons we talked about earlier, right? Creating the systems and all that other stuff, right? So franchisors want to get you through that 2 to 3 year window where most businesses fail by providing the ongoing support, the initial support, or the training. They typically lose money in the beginning, but if they can get you to that $500,000, $1 million threshold at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9%, now they're making real money on you and with you. So, you know, they benefit as you are successful and they lose if you're not successful. So it's sort of like being in business for yourself and not by yourself. And that's sort of the purpose of royalties. So there's a trade-off, right? Franchising works. We kind of talked about a lot of this. I'm not going to spend time. There's the experience, the initial training, the culture of the teamwork. Most of the good franchise companies, as you're going through due diligence, you'll find that every year they do a big convention. They bring all of the franchisees in and they talk about best practices, what's working, what's not working. There's that culture of success that they're trying to tap into and reinforce year after year, month after month. They're not all the same. I said there's 3,600 franchises out there. Because it's a franchise, it caution you again. Doesn't mean it's good, right? Doesn't mean it's right for you. But they come in all shapes, sizes, colors, and flavors, right? And we help you to kind of figure out, well, for you, is it the well-established Meineke, or is it that newer emerging brand with plenty of white space to develop here in New Jersey and beyond? Everybody's different. It's sort of like the funding tolerance. Some people want a structured system. Some want a system where it's a little more flexible. Talked about that. How do we find the right fit? Couple key questions to ask yourself. Are you willing to follow the franchisor system? Very important, right? Franchisors don't want you to come in and reinvent the wheel. They want you to clone it and make it yours and improve upon it. Is it in your financial wheelhouse? What's the risk level like, and is it acceptable to you? How are you going to get that information? You're going to talk to franchisees and get a sense of, you know, what is the true risk, right? The best way to get the information. Listen, the franchisors are great. They're going to tell you all the wonderful things, but you know, where the rubber meets the road is talk to people that made that investment and are still doing it today. And at the end of the day, will you enjoy your business? Can you see yourself a day in a life running a damage restoration firm, right? Making people, your end user, the consumer, feel good because now they're back in their home or back in their business. We talked about all of this earlier. Financial security. What are the things that are important to you? Why are you doing it? At the end of the day, it sounds like Joe was pretty successful, you know, Wall Street, finance, you know, what's your background? HR, financial management, customer service, sales, and marketing. And then align that with what the franchisor is looking for, right? You know, if we think staffing franchise, talked a little bit about that earlier. You know, staffing franchisors are looking for people who are hunters, right? They can go and knock on 10 doors, get 9 no's, get up tomorrow, still feel good about themselves and do it again, right? They're looking for that hunter, that person who's a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10. What are you? What are you bringing to the table? And does it align with the transferable skills of the existing franchisees in that system? They're all targeting something. And so at FranNet, we break it down into what we call your personal business model, right? You know, what kind of employees do you want? Do you want a few or do you want many, right? Some franchises, let's look at residential cleaning. Your employees are going to be blue collar employees. That's what it is, right? So if all you've managed was, you know, white collar employees in your corporate life, you may have some angst about managing blue collar employees. We think these are important questions to ask. What sort of business environment do you want? Do you want to wake up and walk across the hall to your home office, or do you want a retail storefront? You know, how many hours do you want to put in a business, right? If you have young kids, like I did when I bought my business, you know, I wanted less hours. I wanted more flexibility. Where does that fit in? What are your lifestyle goals? You know, again, if the customers and the consumers that you worked with in corporate America were white collar, B2B, or do you want, you know, a B2C sort of model, or is a combination of the two satisfactory to you? So again, these seem like basic questions. I would venture to guess to you that people fall in love with the widget first, and then they work backwards and go, well, who are the employees? What's my budget? You know, how many units can I scale over time in this particular model? And we say, don't work backwards, work forward, right? Address all of these things and many others. This is just sort of a depiction of how we're going to help you get into the weeds, because again, it's a big investment. And we want you to dot the I's and cross the T's. So one of the things we do at FranNet is we have an online assessment. If you guys want to take the assessment, it doesn't cost you anything. It's an online proprietary profiling tool, right? It's similar to, you've probably taken a Myers-Briggs or a DISC assessment at some point in your corporate life, right? Very similar to that. We've refined it and defined it so that it helps us and helps you to figure out what are your individual values and motives and how that aligns with certain different business opportunities. Again, our entire goal is we've got to work this down from 3,600 franchises to what's the best fit for you. So the online assessment takes you about 30 minutes to complete online. You have to do it when you have uninterrupted time. When you complete the assessment, it gets emailed to me automatically. I look it over, I send it back to you, ask you to review it. What we're looking for there is outliers, things that may or may not be true. Remember, it's computer modeling, right? More often than not, my clients say that it's about 95, 96% accurate, but we're going to do a follow-up call. We're going to go through the assessment. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. Is this right? Is this accurate? Is this really you, right? Here's some success metrics that we have tracked. This data goes back about 3 or 4 years now. We haven't updated in the last 3 or 4 years, but I'm told we have some folks working on it in the home office. But after 2 years, and this is SBA data, after 2 years, 64% of businesses in the United States are still open. After 5 years, it drops down about 50%. At FranNet, we kind of track it based on, you know, our placements. We do about 500 placements a year throughout the country. That 64% goes to 91%, and the 50% goes to 85% after 5 years. Part of that is, again, and I highlighted it a few minutes ago, is we force you to get in the weeds. We hold you accountable to the process. We make sure that you're asking the right questions, right? So that at the end of the day, if we do our job and you're committed to the process, the odds of finding it the right fit are substantially greater in terms of your ultimate success level. Important, folks, I'm going to close on a couple of notes. we bring some value to the table on the franchise side. The franchise disclosure document that I talked about is a legal document. It's typically very voluminous in nature, could be 100 pages, it could be 400 pages, right? So we typically say, hey, hire a good franchise attorney. Not my cousin Vinny that's not going to charge you, right? You need to hire a franchise attorney that understands franchise law and is not going to try to negotiate things for you that are not normal and customary in a franchise space. I have a few attorneys I work with. They range from different price points, but I'd be more than happy to make those referrals to you as I do on a day-to-day basis, as well as an accountant. Good reads that I recommend, E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber. Great book, talks about one of the fundamental premises of franchising, which is working on your business and not in your business. And certainly a great book by a good friend of mine, Joe Matthews, called Street Smart Franchising. Here is my contact information if you want to reach out. One of my favorite people, George Patton. A good plan violently executed right now is better than a perfect plan next week. How often do I hear people say, well, you know, I don't know when it's not the perfect time. This is not the perfect time for me. And it may never be the perfect time, but a good plan violently executed right now is better than a perfect plan next week or next year or 2 years after. So I hope I gave you a couple nuggets to think about, to chew on. Certainly, it's 4:21. We've got about 9 minutes. If you have a few questions that are unanswered, I'm more than happy to stay on. Or if you want to reach out to me and talk offline, more than happy to do that. And if you'd like to complete the assessment, more than happy to send it to you. Any questions before we depart? All right, listen, thanks for your time. Good luck, all the best in 2020. And
wait,
all the best.
can I just, I'm sorry,
Yep.
I was trying to unmute and
Okay.
I was messing up. This was really helpful, and I think it's helping me as I start to just, you know, consider going down this path. So, so again, you're going to be sending out these materials, and then we can reach back out to you with further questions. Is that right?
Absolutely. So Priscilla and her team will send out the PowerPoint, and then you'll reach out to me when you get that and say, hey, Boynton, I'd like to complete the assessment. This is a no pressure proposition, right? This is, you reach out whenever you're ready and you say, Boynton, I'd like to take the assessment. I'd like to, you know, learn more about where I am today relative to franchise business ownership. And I'll simply email it to you and you complete it at your leisure. Again, you just have to do it when you have 30 minutes of uninterrupted time, or else it'll time out on you. But yeah, so that's the process in a nutshell. Yep.
And then I have to ask the question, what's in it for you? You know, I know you said there's no fee. Are you guys working with do you get some sort of commission with the franchises, or how does that work? Yeah,
great question. And normally I address that right up front. I can't believe I didn't do that. So thank you for bringing that to the top. So yeah, the work that we do with you doesn't cost you any money. We have about 180 to 183 companies in our inventory now that we have a contract with. Think of us as an outsourced recruiting arm for them. So they use us to find capable, fundable, qualified, interested clients to introduce to their concepts, right? And they know when I introduce you to them, I'm introducing you to them and about 3 or 4 other companies. So we're never locked into one company. And so the arrangement is that they understand that. And for whichever company is the best fit for you, everybody's on board with that. So as part of the outsourced recruiting arm for these firms, yes, they are then required to pay us only if at some point you sign an agreement with that company. Otherwise, we don't make any money on it. And the fact of the matter is, and I tell everybody this, most of the people I work with end up not buying a business anyway. People that are good at this and that are committed to this, they do it because they want to help you get to that proverbial fork in the road. And we understand going in that, it's going to be a yes or no, and 70% of the time it's a no. But for me, that's perfectly fine, because I know I did the right thing, because you made the right decision for you at this point in your life, right? But it's not uncommon for people that got to the fork in the road and said no today, for them to come back 2, 3, 4, 5 years later and go, you know what, Boynton, thanks. Really wasn't ready then, for all the things we talked about, and it was very helpful, but I think I'm ready now. So don't ever feel bad. You're not wasting my time. I get up out of bed and come to work every day to do this because I enjoy helping people, because franchising gave me the opportunity to put my kids through college, and it provided me with the control and the flexibility and the independence that I desired. So I love sharing my story, my passion, and my vehicle to success with other people. And if it's not good for them today, that's okay. But yes, so at the end of the day, the franchisors are required to pay us. And as a result of that, though, they're also required to do some other things for you. When I introduce you to them and send over all of your information, your personal business model, your assessment, then they're required to contact you within 24 hours. So you're not that person that, clicked on a button on the internet who they know nothing about, and they reach out to you a month later, right? So there's a win-win for all parties involved. That was sort of a long way of answering your question, but.
Yeah, no, that was perfect. I appreciate it.
Okay, well, thanks. All right, well, Joe, listen, I look forward to talking to you at some point in the future. Don't hesitate if you have any questions. And I guess we'll close out, Priscilla. No, I guess Priscilla's great. Joe, I guess it's you and I.
Actually, good afternoon. I was pretty quiet on the line. I didn't really have any questions. George, you asked a lot of questions that I may have answered. My name is Earl Jones. Sorry. Very good presentation. Just wanted to make you aware that I was here as well.
Awesome. Thanks for the feedback. What was your name? I'm sorry.
My name is Earl Jones.
Earl Jones. Nice to meet you. I guess this is electronically.
Yes.
Right. So Earl, certainly, again, to my point with Joe, if you have any questions, you have my contact information. The presentation will go out to you guys. Feel free to reach out at any point. My office is in Metuchen, and I have an office on 34th Street in Manhattan.
Oh, okay, great.
Yep. So you guys have a great week. Have a great weekend. Look forward to chatting with you soon. Yep.
Sounds good. Take care.
Okay, thanks. Bye.